Hello all. In this talk, I will first try to outline a couple of upon a couple of concepts that we feel it's related to the field we all in which we are all active, and then also just briefly go through how we try to incorporate these concepts into our protocol. So the first thing, which I think it's like not being really spoken a lot about, is the awareness that the physical and the virtual worlds have merged. In essence, what this means is that we tend to kind of like mentally see them as separate entities. We do like this mental digital dualism, but in essence we can see like today's actions are often guided from the virtual to the physical. Simple example would be people going to a concert to make a selfie and collect likes and not listen to music. And at the same time, what the problem is that if we accept this notion, how these two worlds have merged, then I guess we should also look at it that norms of behavior and values should also be synchronized throughout these domains. But this is not the case. So when we speak about data, when we speak about personal data, it's quite often that behavior that happens in the virtual world would be totally unacceptable in the physical. Let's just imagine, you know, you're on a date, and there comes like this guy with a Facebook t-shirt, and sits next to you and says like, do not mind me, you just keep on talking, I'll make some notes to know what you sell later. You know, probably you would be full of enthusiasm. And we could go on and on with these kind of examples, you know, like a postman coming, opening your post and saying, oh, I see you're planning a trip to Bahamas. Here's some special offer for shorts and kitesurfing course. So, and why is this important? This is important in also how we design the systems, how we think about it, and how we approach these topics. Now, the second concept is that your personal data is actually your digital self. So this can be quite a meta concept. In essence, I would here even continue more in a sense if we accept this, so that I don't go into depth like that we discussed, like the notion of selves and stuff like that. Now imagine, okay, we have all our personal data collected in one place. What happens when we run scripts over it? And it's like the first moment when we give our digital self a little bit of autonomy. And then we run some more scripts on it. And what does then the future bring? When we can have like fully autonomous digital self, what is our relation to this digital self? Are we growing dependent? Are we basically relinquishing our free will? So these are like, again, some questions just to ponder about. The next one, which is lately gaining quite a lot of traction, is that data should be considered as labor. Currently, the most common idea is that data is capital. The more data I have, the more capital I have. And this results in like seeing companies hoarding immense amounts of data, not really knowing what to do, but it's capital. So it's just good to have it stored there, and one day we will figure out how to use it. And again, why is this important? It's important also because if we accept this, the data is labor, it changes a lot of other dynamics. So for example, the question of who's the owner of data. And this can go back to slavery law. In times of slavery law, in essence, the slavery law was like, do not kill your slave unless it really makes trouble. You know, so, and then when slavery was abolished, social law came into place, which was kind of basically addressing the idea of employment. And with employment, it means I can work for you, but you don't own me. So if we accept data as labor, we can also basically deduct this notion. So you can use my personal data, but you don't own my personal data, because my personal data is actually me. Therefore, because of all this, and there are also other reasons, we at DataFund, we deeply believe that in the digital age, freedom begins with truly owning your data. And it's like the person who will own your data will own your future. And because of that, privacy matters, because it protects your digital self, among other things. But here at the summit, we speak a lot about technical solutions, and yes, there are technical challenges, but at the same time, we need to be aware that privacy is as much a social challenge as it's a technological challenge. It's really, when we speak with people, when we work with people, and DataFund is developing a privacy solution, it's really incredible how people do not care about privacy. And this is part of this lack of awareness that the physical and virtual world have merged, that the personal data is our digital self, and the data is labor. So we are actually, because of the lack of awareness, we are kind of now in a slavery relationship. Things are changing, especially in Europe, especially on the front of awareness. We will see how much on the front of legal things. So in Europe, there's a new directive coming into place at the end of the month called GDPR. How many of you have heard about GDPR? Cool. So I can then just skip this. What is important for us is DataFund, and this is why we focus also at first at the European Union, is that basically GDPR introduces a lot higher punishments, and this for us changes the game theoretic setting. So like some assumption and how we look at the protocol are a lot better possible in Europe than in rest of the world. Nonetheless, we feel that the rest of the world will follow. Also at this point, I just take the opportunity, if we are very open, we can help also you. If you feel that you touch upon GDPR or are not sure, you can just contact us, and our in-house lawyer can give you first a rundown how compliant you are, and then we see if we can help. So all this leads to another thing that we are quite missing in this space, and it's the talk about ethics. Ethics, in essence, could be considered like that it's about inventing good or bad, and we feel like with the systems, with the decentralized systems that we build, and that those systems that touch directly upon the human. So in our case, it's like if somebody decides which data to share and what to do with the data, that we need ethics, because ethics is, in our opinion, it's a social consensus. So it's important because ethics address how incentives drive behavior. This is like one of the biggest issues, and I think in the future we will even speak more about this, because currently most of the systems that we have in place, actually, I don't know any that don't, just address so-called extrinsic motivation, and the main value of the network is actually greed. So there is already some research coming out how just monetary incentives in the network, how they can basically these networks through time become toxic. And you know, if you follow a little bit what's going on in the Bitcoin community, well, moreover, ethics awareness eliminates ignorance and minimizes unintended effects, side effects. So it's like, again, we are supposed to build unstoppable apps. Unstoppable apps. So what's going to happen in 10, 20, 50 years, you know? It's like, and when we look, like at the beginning, small features, like, let's take, for example, Facebook Like. It's a very nice feature, small feature, but did anybody 10 years ago expect that just that like button will have such a profound impact on our society? So when we think about designing incentives, upgradability of the protocols for the unstoppable apps, think about the butterfly effect. So just a small feature can create a monster in the future. So basically, these are like the concepts that kind of guide our development of the protocol and our dApp. And in essence, DataFund is a protocol that guards personal data, provides safe storage, and enables provable, fair, and ethical data exchange. At least we hope that's going to happen. One of the guidelines, main guidelines that we have in the protocol design is our so-called min-max sharing principle, which essentially says like minimize sharing of your personal data, do it on the need-to-know basis, know why you give out your personal data, while on the other side, maximize sharing of anonymized data. Anonymized data doesn't expose us, but it can benefit to big data sets in all kinds of areas, from smart cities, research, health, so forth. Now the protocol, in essence, has 3 layers. Consent management. It always starts with consent, so our permission, mutual agreement, so to say. And this is here also hides the GDPR part. We are not specifically talking about GDPR on the level of protocol design, but it is maybe even stricter. Then it's followed by personal data exchange and anonymized data exchange. I will now just touch upon the anonymized data exchange, because it's kind of like the fun part, to present how we kind of see this working. So maybe before I start with explaining this diagram, DataFund is envisioned also as a model, as sort of like a concept. Like if we talk about curation markets, if we talk about prediction markets, so forth. So it's DataFund also a model how things should be done in terms of exchanging data. It's drawing inspiration upon financial funds as the fund part. And if we buy into the notion that personal data has value, then we also agree that different categories of personal data have value. And these categories can be considered as assets in your personal data fund, which you manage. So basically, you're the one who's saying what kind of data are you going to collect, what kind of data do you want to share, and under which conditions. And this also, at the end, determines your monetization options if you're interested in monetizing. And everybody can have one or several data funds. So the general idea is, like in a financial fund, we have investors, so-called LPs. They invest the money, the fund manager then decides which assets to hold and basically manages the fund, and then the profits are being split after fees are taken from the fund manager. DataFund is doing actually something quite similar. So we incentivize companies to give the data back. I mean, it's a little bit upside down thinking. So why do we need to incentivize and actually buy back our data if it's ours? But let's call it the power of incentives. So how it happens, it's like DataFund itself is taking a little bit also inspiration from curation markets using a bonding curve. And in essence, it's like company A comes to me and says like, Gregor, we've been collecting data about you for 5 years. It's nicely structured. We did the work, and we feel it would enrich your data set. I look at it, I evaluate it, I agree, I accept it, and I mint back my personal tokens from the data fund. And same happens with company B. Now, if they are supplying the same data, kind of same type of data, the value goes down. It's like if basically first come, first serve. So this already drives the incentive. Then me as data fund manager, or in this case Alice, I decide what I want to share and how I want to share it. We, with our token mechanics, we actually incentivize anonymized data sharing. So this is I think, of utter importance. And then we try to push this to as many data marketplaces as possible. So anonymized data marketplaces. This monetization creates revenues. Revenues go back into the data fund and are split according to the shares of the tokens. So the token holders who got issued these personal tokens are entitled to a share. So why do we do this? Why do we do this? It's actually quite. This was kind of like, at the moment, the only also solution that we see how fair and ethical data exchange could be done. And the thing is, with this kind of setup, companies are actually incentivized to give data back, to add value to your data, and individuals get the control to decide what happens with that data. At the same time, it's this kind of relationship establish partnership. So it's organizations and individuals together create a new revenue stream. Instead, that it would be like this kind of zero-sum game where organizations do a lot of dodgy monetizations behind the back of the users. And in this way, actually everybody can grow the data set, and hopefully we can make the data available to a wider audience. In essence, data that wants to be shared should be shared, and through that we decrease also information asymmetry. So I haven't actually mentioned Swarm, but I think it's kind of self-explanatory that this vision that we have is basically impossible to do without Swarm. So we see how we plan to use the swap, swear, and swindle framework, and of course the data, our data, should be stored there where we define how we access it and to who we share it. And with that, I would thank you, and if there are any questions, feel free. Yes.
You talked about consent, and what I would like to ask that even today when we register for a service or install a software, we usually agree to the terms of service, but we do not really read it and know what is in it. So how can you make sure that that consent is something meaningful?
So this is a good question, and it's actually what I maybe also should have made more clear throughout the presentation. It's about the process. Personally, I don't believe there can be today developed a solution that will just magically solve everything. So part of this process is, in Europe at least, it started with GDPR, where we are now getting like a lot of emails asking companies, where companies ask us if we agree. Then it's like this kind of black swan events, like we see Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, and all these drives awareness. A good thing in GDPR is that there is also one notion that privacy policies should be made in a readable format. Yeah. But when we speak about consent, the idea is that now when we ask for consent, it should be presented in a couple of sentences, not that you have to read like 20 pages, you know, like that it feels like every privacy policy on each side is like a white paper to read. So yeah, we hope it's going to change. And also through this process that also using third parties, that organizations say, for example, we use DataFund for personal data management, it's kind of already a cognitive shortcut for the user, or other services, of course. But yeah, it's a process.